Playoff basketball has arrived. What a time to be alive. It's finally that time of the year where you sit down, make a bracket, and there's so many question marks this playoffs. Is it Chris Paul's time to win a championship? Are the Lakers genuine contenders? Is this Philly's last chance? We'll find out the answers in due time, but for now, we can only really speak.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. Honestly, this is one of the episodes I've been really looking forward to. Playoff basketball, it's what we play the regular season for. It's obviously what all the players in the NBA aspire to be playing and being a part of, which is the postseason. So looking forward to being able to provide our predictions and having a bit of a rebuttal to see whether we agree or disagree, and basically how this prediction is going to work. We're going to touch on every first round series in a bit more detail. So we're basically going to talk about a strength and a weakness for each each team that's participating in this postseason. We're going to talk about an X factor for that particular team, also 3 talking points from the series, and then eventually we're going to give our individual predictions for each series. But ultimately, we're going to have to come to an agreement. If we have a disagreement for any particular series, we're going to have to provide our arguments as to why we think this team will win, and eventually come to an agreement to select just one team out of the 2 that we've decided on. Let's get stuck in. So the first series we're looking at here is the Timberwolves and the Nuggets. So just a quick thing before we obviously proceed to each strength and weakness of both teams is just a little bit about the regular season results that took place between these teams. There was 4 matchups during the season. The Timberwolves took out the first one 124-111. The Nuggets 122-118 in the second matchup. Timberwolves 128 to Nuggets 98. And the Nuggets 146-112 in their most recent encounter on February 7th. So, Marcus, I'll get you to touch on the Timberwolves to start with and what to look out for in their situation in this particular series.
Yeah, okay, so the Timberwolves, we all know what happened recently with Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson. My stance on them currently, they're on demand. They're without Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, 2 predominantly pretty big players for them. Also, McDaniels is a terrific defender, and we know Naz serves as a pretty solid backup for Cat. So I think with those 2 being on demand, it kind of devalues their team quite a lot. And with the first game, we saw they got blown out by the Nuggets, and I don't really see them clicking all that too well. I don't think they have the camaraderie to cause an upset early. So for my X factor for Minnesota, I have Nickeil Alexander-Walker. This guy, he isn't the most noticeable name on the Wolves list, but I think with guys like McDaniels out and Naz Reid out, they're looking for another guy who can come in and just score the basketball at a high level, and I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker does that. He didn't really do it today, but he has that game to him where he can step up a couple games, and maybe they can even sneak a game and win a game in this series. But yeah, he's my X factor. And should I go with my strength and the weaknesses for the Wolves as well?
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Okay, so for my strengths, it's the big man presence that they have with Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns. I think having those 2 guys, I mean, on paper it's scary. I don't think it works the best, and we've seen that throughout the regular season, but I think anytime you have those 2, we haven't seen it yet in playoff basketball, so maybe it's a whole different dynamic. So I put that as their strength, and then for their weakness, I think a real weakness for the Minnesota Timberwolves is their half-court offense. Sometimes it gets real sluggish, and they kind of second-guess what they want to do. They don't really have too many set plays, and we saw that in that play-in game, against the Lakers.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you. Obviously, losing McDaniels, that was a really big loss for them, and I think the defensive versatility provides, and obviously the issues he would have caused on the defensive side of the ball for the Nuggets, it would have been a bit of a mismatch nightmare, especially with his length. I think they lack consistency. Obviously, when Gobert and Towns are on the floor together, at times the offense stagnates, and yeah, like you said, in that Lakers play-in game, you saw there was not much movement off the ball, kind of just dribble handoffs and sort of waiting for something to happen, and then it'll be a little bit of an ISO ball and just chuck up a shot. They do obviously shoot the ball well. They shot averaged nearly 13 trays a game since the All-Star break at 39%. So they are good at that, and they do have the rim protection and ability to force turnovers, which is their other strengths as well. But like you said, I think when, they don't have that fluidity on their offensive side of the ball and all of that factoring in, I think it's going to be a struggle for them. In terms of the Nuggets, I think the strengths are obviously they've got the 5th highest offensive rating in the NBA, led by obviously Nikola Jokic's incredible numbers, shoots an efficient and crazy efficiency at 70% true shooting, averaging obviously 24.5 points per game. They also come in at number 3 in clutch defense in the NBA. So a lot of the games in the playoffs are obviously close games, and they've obviously shown that they can defend at that high level in the clutch time, and their record against the top teams in the NBA suggests that can give them a lot of confidence to make a deep run in the playoffs. They're 13-4 against Sacramento, Phoenix, Memphis, Golden State, the Clippers, and obviously that's a significant number. I think another strength of the Nuggets is a healthy MPJ, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, that trio together, obviously complemented by a guy like Aaron Gordon. I think if they can keep those 3 on the court and those additional pieces can come in and obviously contribute and have a breakout game, whether it be one of the guys off the bench or, every game that they take turns in that sort of aspect, I think it's going to be hard to stop. And especially the X factor for me is Jamal Murray. If he can come back to those levels that he played at in the bubble back in 2020, obviously we saw how lethal he was. I know it was the bubble. I know there was a lot of question marks obviously about the whole bubble environment, but for him to go off and really break out that series, obviously before the injury took place, I think if he can start getting confidence back, which he obviously saw today in game 1, that he stepped up, nearly had a triple-double, I think that he's the kind of guy that once he gets his confidence and his mojo, I don't think anyone can stop him, especially in big-time situations like this. Their only weakness, I guess, is their pick-and-roll defense. That'll be problematic. Teams will scheme to put Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray in the ball screen actions.
I had him in 4. And I 100% agree with what you said about the supporting cast. I think, to me, with the undermanned Wolves team without Nas and McDaniels, I really rate the likes of Bruce Brown, KCP and Reggie Jackson. I think all those guys can do wonders for them if AJ or Jamal or Nicole or Michael Porter aren't having the biggest of games. These dudes are definitely more than serviceable to, come up with a couple big games. And yeah, I don't think there's any questions of who's winning this series. But
just finally, 3 things to watch, 3 key things that I think are going to be at least something to look forward to in this series. It'll be the battle in the paint. Obviously, with Gobert and Jokic, they've matched up on 28 occasions in the past, and Jokic has obviously had his number numerous times. He loves playing against Gobert, so obviously I expect that to continue. The clash of the power forwards, obviously with Kat and Aaron Gordon going up against each other, I think that'll be an interesting matchup throughout the entire series. And the final thing is the youth versus experience at point guard. Obviously, you've got the experienced head in Mike Conley, who's played in a lot of playoff basketball games, and obviously you got Jamal Murray, who hasn't seen any playoff action since 2020, and obviously with the injury, he had a bit of a layoff. So I'm looking forward to seeing those two go at it, and that'll be a combative battle for an entire series. But again, like we said, we both agree on this. Nuggets to progress to the second round.
Okay, so the next game we'll move on to in the West Coast, the Phoenix Suns and the LA Clippers. Probably one of the most entertaining first round series that I've seen in a long time. I definitely know that. And based off today what happened, Clippers winning, it makes me question who's going to win this series. I think it's a lot tighter than people think. We know what the Phoenix Suns are capable of. I think, you have Booker, Aiden, Chris Paul, and then you add KD to the mix. Obviously, they lost Mikal and Cam and all these guys, but Kevin Durant's Kevin Durant. It's a 4-headed monster down there in Phoenix. It's just absolutely stacked. Personally, I got this game going to 7. I got Phoenix winning this game, but I think it's going to be really tough. I don't really have too much to say about Phoenix besides the fact that today was their first loss with Kevin Durant. So I think that kind of says something about this team. But the reason I have them going through is because, the Paul George, we don't know when he's coming back. I know Kawhi is Kawhi, and he had damn near 40 today, and they won the game. But I just don't see him doing this for 4 games and then winning the series. I don't think Phoenix are gonna let this one down, especially because it's coming to the end of Chris Paul's career and he's looking for that ring. KD's looking for that. I guess people will tick this one off as the first official ring, and I think Booker's hungry, and Aiden, I think he has it in him to where he can have a really good playoff series. But my X factor for the Phoenix Suns is DeAndre Ayton. I think if he plays well, serves his role, plays well in the post and the pick and roll situation, I think he can do this team wonders. He doesn't necessarily have to have 20 and 10 every game, but if he can rebound the ball well, if he's getting looks from the post-up situation, kicking it out to these open guys like KD and Book, it's going to be pretty scary. My strength for the Phoenix Suns, it's obviously the fact that they have the 4-headed monster down there. I think it's easier said than done, but I just think this team's so stacked and it's going to be really tough for them to lose. And then my weakness for this team, Suns, although they have barely lost with Kevin Durant, I think the fact that they haven't really played all too much with each other, especially in playoff.
I had the same thing. I had DeAndre Ayton as an X factor for the Phoenix Suns. I think you kind of know what you're going to expect from the other guys, but I think obviously with the fallout that he kind of had with Monty Williams last year in the playoffs, and he wanted to basically see his way out of Phoenix at one point, I think he'll be the key, because if the other guys aren't really on their game or if they're all being nullified, he'll be that guy down on the block, getting the rebounds like you said, and just being that presence that he is at 7'1". I think they're a bit top heavy. I think that's their only concern. Obviously, they've got too many top end guys, but the rotation could be questionable from the pieces that they do have on the bench, and they are a bit susceptible to live ball turnovers. I guess when they're bogged down trying new things, or the second unit is out there, they're trying to prove themselves. We've seen that in one game. They had 14 team turnovers, which turned into 31 points against OKC in one of the games. So that's pretty much unacceptable. I think against a team like the Clippers, you can't get away with that many turnovers. But obviously the strengths, you got the most lethal scoring duo in the playoffs with Booker and KD. That'll take pressure off CP3. He can just play his own game, doesn't really have to look to score or have to be too aggressive with it. He can find looks for the other guys. And I think from the Clippers' perspective, their greatest strength is obviously a 2-time finals MVP in Kawhi Leonard, the experience that he provides, and obviously he's a big-time performer regardless, coming off the ACL surgery. He's now averaging 27, 7 and 4 on 53, 47 and 90 shooting splits in his last 35 games. He's playing full minutes load during that span, broke 40 minutes twice, so we're starting to see a bit more of that continuity with Kawhi Leonard's game. But obviously they're the third best 3-point shooting team this season. The volume in which they create quality attempts varies, but obviously they've got guys drawing 2 defenders like to Kawhi, and then you got guys like Eric Gordon, Norman Powell, Covington, Batum, Terrence Mann. They're all willing to let it fly, making 39% or better on the season. You got Bones Highland now, who's fearless himself, and even Westbrook starting to hit threes. Obviously he had a poor shooting performance today, but you know what he's going to bring. And their bench depth, obviously they got such a deep bench. I think that will probably help them in this particular regard. I guess their weaknesses, you've obviously got certain things like the PG injury that obviously limits them to only the one superstar against a 4-headed monster like the Phoenix Suns have. But I think an X factor from the Clippers perspective to me is Norman Powell. I think outside of PG and Kawhi, he was the most consistent and dependable player for the Clippers this season. He emerged as one of the game's best 6 men or best bench players, averaging 17 points in 26 minutes. It's a good security blanket when they didn't suit up. He's a good defender. So I think that's an X factor. If he can perform to that level, and really the rest of the bench guys as well come in and contribute and play their role like they need to, I think it could help go a long way in keeping this series alive. I think it's going to go to 7 as well, and I do believe the Suns are going to get up. As much as I would love to see the Clippers upset the Suns here, I just think with that much firepower that the Suns have, I think it's just going to be too strong for the Clippers. But 3 things to watch before I proceed. Obviously, it's going to be the superstar matchup between Kawhi Leonard and Kevin Durant. what Chris Paul's impact in this series is going to be, which will obviously determine how his playoff run and, you know, the deep playoff run the Suns have will obviously depend on the impact he has in this initial series. That'll sort of foreshadow a lot what's going to happen in the next series. And obviously PG, if he can come back before this series is out, if they can extend it to 7 and, you know, somehow he manages to get back for this series, that could go a long way in swaying the series in the Clippers' favour. But I still believe the Suns will progress from this.
I had the Suns in 7 as well. It's going to be... I just can't see them going home in the first round. They're too stacked to just go home. But, I agree with Norman Powell. That's a great X factor. I put down, even though it's not my team to speak about X factor, I had Westbrook defensively, because obviously today he killed it on the defensive end.
He knew all the secrets from when they were at OKC together, so I think he knew all his moves and he's sort of one step ahead. But it's good to see that tenacity and the intensity there, and you saw that he had that run in again with another fan. So it's just Westbrook doing Westbrook things, and at this time of the year, especially with a lot on the line and playing against a stacked Suns team, he's just got that white line fever, which he always does have, and, you know, never surprises me when he has a run in with some sort of a fan at any point in time in the season, but especially come playoff time. So I'm really excited to watch the rest of this series. I think this is probably the one series in this first round, along with the Kings and the Warriors, that I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I think I'm going to be keeping a close eye as the games go along and as the series progresses. So we can unanimously decide that the Suns will be going ahead in this series. So moving on to the next one, I guess. Alright, so the next series we have Sacramento versus the Warriors. The 3 seed versus the 6 seed in the West. Obviously, that game was exhilarating to watch, that game 1. Golden One Center was buzzing. It brought back this nostalgia for me, seeing the way that center was rocking, the way Sacramento was rocking. It reminded me of exactly the time when they had that massive run in the 2002 season, when they had Pedro Stojakovic, Divac, Chris Webber, Bibby, when they obviously unfortunately got bowed out by all Lakers. But it's just great to see them back in the playoffs after such an absence. I think the Kings in the playoffs it should be a match made in heaven going forward, in my opinion, and hopefully we see them consistently around this mark again next year as well. But in terms of the game and the series itself, what do you make of it? What did you got in terms of the outlook for the Warriors going forward?
So for the Warriors going forward, I'm pretty scared for the Warriors, to be honest. I mean, the away record is 11-30, which it's pretty bad, especially coming off winning an NBA championship. It's pretty unacceptable. But with that being said, they got Andrew Wiggins back, who's obviously a huge part of that team. But I really do think the Kings could cause an upset here. I think experience, I don't know, it's so hard to pick, because experience, I think, could take over from the Warriors. But then they're also 11-30, and the Kings haven't had any playoffs experience in the last 16 years. So this one is a really tough one for me to gauge. I have my pick, I'll save it for the end. But moving on to my X factor, it's having Andrew Wiggins back. I think he's a huge part of that team, especially on the defensive end. We know what he brings offensively. He can hit that corner 3. He gets into his lane. He hits those mid-range shots. He's a really important piece to them. So I have him as my X factor with him returning. And they've struggled a bit without him. And then for the strength, I have playoff experience. Obviously, this team coming off an NBA championship. And also Also them coming off winning championships against LeBron and the Cavs for multiple years. But their weakness has to be their away record. So, 11-30, not playing at home, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, they're very susceptible to the road games, but I guess the advantage they do have is it's not a massive road trip down the highway from San Francisco to Sacramento. So I guess that is an advantage for them in that sense to sort of, I guess, play devil's advocate to that whole road record thing. But again, they still have to travel, and that's a really imposing arena to step into. You've seen how loud it gets in there, and I think no matter how much experience you have come playoff time, I think that can definitely overawe a lot of people. I think one big weakness that they struggle with is they're ranked 30th in the NBA, just behind the Houston Rockets for turnovers. So that's just too big of an issue. Obviously, hasn't been an issue in the past, but opponents are scoring an average of 19.4 points per game off their giveaway. So they need to limit that. And I think, but obviously they've got a lot of strengths. 3 guys averaging 20 plus per game. You know, got guys shooting collectively 39% on the year for threes. So obviously the championship pedigree is important as well. But going on the Kings, I think the strengths that they have, obviously you've got bench depth, and they're very selfless team style of play. They love to move the ball. They love to find the best shot possible. Obviously, guys like De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk and Sabonis will get theirs, and they'll try and be aggressive when they need to be. But obviously, when they're not going to force it, they need to force it at times when that star player needs to take over. But for the most part, they always try and find the open man and find the best possible shot, and that's a credit to Mike Brown and what he's done. And obviously that's shown with their offensive rating of 118.6. It dwarfs anything Golden State was putting up in its golden era between 2015 and 2019. And you look at their weaknesses, I think their struggle will probably be their defensive side of it and getting consecutive stops, especially against a potent Warriors offense. I think a great example of this was against the Bucks on March 13th. It was a 2-point contest with less than 4 minutes left, and the Bucks scored on 6 straight possessions to secure the victory. So I guess playing successful defense stops teams from going on big runs, and Kings might struggle to do that, but obviously they managed to match it on the offensive side of the ball, even though Steph Curry made some big shots in game 1 and continued to go back and forth on both sides of the ball. So I think that is one weakness that might stop them, and obviously a lack of playoff experience. Obviously they haven't been to the Kings haven't been to the playoffs for a long time, and a lot of their guys are new to the whole playoff experience, so that might, I guess, go against them in that sense. But the X factor for me for this Kings side is none other than Malik Monk. I think there's been certain matchups this year where I've watched the Kings play, and he's just taken over. And I think when you have to stop a guy like him who loves to aggressively attack the rim, and he's got that above the rim ability, but he's got the excellent shooting from the outside as well, I think then teams have to start honing in on him defensively. And then that leaves guys like Fox, obviously, to be able to do his thing, especially Fox in the fourth quarter with what he does and being the clutch performer that he is. I think that just makes it so much harder to defend that Kings team. And the fact is they won with Sabonis struggling offensively. So if they can all click on and get themselves going every single game, then I don't think there's anything that can stop him. And Malik Monk leads that with that intensity and, just willingness to be relentless in his pursuit downhill when he does get a step on the defense. So I think look out for him to have some big performances. In this game though, or in this series I should say, well, we're obviously leaving this to last, but I actually have the Kings in 7.
Ooh. I had the Warriors in 7.
What's your take, I guess, for why you had them in 7 games?
To be honest, my take, it was the fact that Sacramento had limited playoff experience, and the Warriors are coming off winning that NBA championship. I just couldn't see a world where Sacramento come into the playoffs and they knock off the reigning champs. Like, I know Warriors have been struggling to a degree, but I just think there's still a little bit of question marks on the Kings. Are they playoff ready because they haven't played in the playoffs? Kings have been the better team all year though. It's really hard to gauge this one. I need to hear your spiel on why you have Sacramento for me to kind of be convinced. And then I can kind of rebut to what you said, because I can't really think of anything that comes to mind for why Warriors win the series. But it sounds sounds so much worse than it is.
This, like you said, is one of the toughest series to make a decision on. I probably went more with my heart here more than with my head, but I got a soft spot for the Kings. So, you know, in an ideal world, I'd love to see them take this out in 7, but it's a tough one. Honestly, it's really tough. I think, you know, just the perimeter, having those really speedy guards that can attack that lack of perimeter defense that the Warriors do. Obviously, they have Wiggins, but obviously they attack guys like Clay, who's not the defender that he once was. Jordan Poole's not the best defender. Steph Curry, obviously, again, has improved over the years, but again, I wouldn't call him a defensive stopper by any means. So I think the problems that guys like Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox caused the Warriors, obviously, with the dribble penetration, and then they've got enough shooters on the outside to be able to make shots, and the way, like I said, they move the ball, they play with one another. I think that's why I gave them the edge, but you're right. It's hard to give or to discredit the Golden State Warriors, reigning champions. Obviously, we know the pedigree of the guys that have played in those championships, like Steph, Clay, Draymond, even Jordan Poole last year, Wiggins, how important his return is. He missed that crucial corner 3, which obviously could have completely turned this game 1 around. So we don't really know how when he makes that shot, the whole series is already shifted. You know what I mean? So I'll go with you on this one. As much as it pains me to say, I think we'll just have to go with Warriors in 7, just based off their experience. And I think whenever you have a guy like Steph, I know De'Aaron Fox is a big time clutch performer in the fourth quarter, and you know, again, that will cause him a lot of problems. But I think whenever you have a guy like Steph who can just light the fuse whenever he wants, and a guy like Clay that, you know, can get hot at any moment, and it's hard to defend one. If you let one guy off, even if you stop one of them, they've got so many other weapons around them that can just get their own, and I think that'll be too much for the Kings to contain. But I really want to see the Kings go forward, but I'm gonna have to agree with you on this. I might have to change my vote and go the Warriors.
Yeah, it's just hard. I don't know. We'll see. Mike Brown's a great coach, so if they do win, I'm not going to be surprised. But yeah, all right. Warriors.
We'll go with the Warriors then. We'll move them onto the second round. So they await the winner of the Grizzlies and the Lakers, which we're about to preview now. Obviously, this has been a much anticipated matchup for a long time. Obviously, the comments about Dylan Brooks saying he wouldn't mind playing LeBron in a 7-game series. Having, you know, the whole altercation with Desmond Bain and James last year. Obviously, Ja saying he's fine in the West. You know, a lot of factors come into play since the trade for all those assets that Rob Pelinka managed to pull off. The Lakers just look like such a more well-rounded and well-oiled machine. They look very dangerous. And obviously, how could I forget the situation that happened with Shannon Sharp and Team Moran and, you know, that whole incident. So this is like probably the most anticipated matchup out of the whole first round, just based off the storylines and everything that happened in the lead up to this. But I'll get you to give your spiel on the Lakers and what you think, I guess, seeing as though you are a Lakers fan, without being biased. Obviously, you know a little bit more about what their strengths and weaknesses are, seeing as though you do pay a lot more attention to them. But I'll let you go ahead and sort of give me your take on what you think of the Lakers' chances in this series.
Yeah. Before I address the Lakers, firstly, I just want to make a direct message warning to Desmond Bain. What did he say about Rui? He's like, that's the best game of his career, this and that. Over there in Memphis, they just talk too much, I think. Like, just shut the hell up. Just play basketball. But the new look Lakers team, an entirely different team after this trade deadline, obviously. It's kind of hard to gauge off analytics. I don't think it really does them justice, because when we brought in, I guess, this full squad, we've been the best defensive rating team in the league at a rating of 109.8 since adding the likes of Vando and Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, D'Angelo Russell, you know, all these guys. I think a healthy LeBron and AD with this new look Lakers squad, it's hard to stop with the momentum that we have. And then as we've seen today with Hachimura, Aussie Reeves stepping up. it's kind of a next man attitude right now at the Lakers. You know, if LeBron and AD have an off night, we have guys who are more than serviceable to step up, like Reeves and Hachimura. We have plenty of other dudes, Malik Beasley, D'Angelo Russell. To me, they look hard to stop. LeBron's in playoff mode, let's get it. But for the weaknesses for the Lakers, to be honest, we haven't really seen too much of this new look Lakers team, but I'm going to have to go with with Anthony Davis's health. I know you want me to go more in depth with the weaknesses, but it's kind of just too hard to gauge with all the acquisitions that they've made with this new team. It's kind of too much of a small sample size. So I've gone with AD's health because, you know, he's in and out of the lineup, especially in recent seasons because of his health. So he's my weakness. And then for our strength, I think we're kind of star-studded. I think everybody knows their role on this team and their assignment on this team. So not necessarily guys who can score. Obviously, we have a lot of scorers on this team, but I think Vando's going to play a huge role this playoffs where his rebounding defense is going to be needed. We brought in guys like Tristan Thompson, who might not even play, but his veteran leadership's there for a reason. And then D'Angelo Russell, obviously he's a known scorer, but I think we added him because of his spot-up shooting, but also because he's a great playmaker, and he can serve as that secondary playmaker, of course, next to LeBron. And then our X Factor, I think our depth chart, obviously Aussie Reeves has been killing it, I think, since March. So I put Aussie Reeves as our X Factor because he's always reliable. That's my spill. I got the Lakers winning in 6.
I'll get my take on, obviously, what I think the issues or the strengths and weaknesses of the Grizzlies and where that went wrong for them in, obviously, Game 1. But for me, I think one thing that the Lakers maybe might struggle with is transition points. Obviously, the game slows down a lot in the playoffs. There's more half-court offense. So the Lakers allowed 23.4 transition points per game, which was the fourth most in the regular season. So that's some area to, I guess, obviously take away from. And the key is to stop that whole transition and running and gunning kind of offense that the Grizzlies love to play with Bane and Morant ranking 5th and 7th among individuals in transition points. They ranked 2nd in total transition points with 25.8. And you obviously saw in the first time, the 3 regular season meetings, their 2 losses, one without Morant. The Grizzlies totaled 17 fast break points, but in their win, they had 33. So again, it shows that when they get out and run and they extend the court and make it harder for the teams to defend them, then obviously that's when they're most damaging. But I guess one of their weaknesses, which sort of counteracts that, is the half-court offense. So biggest point of concern is their half-court offense. They rank 23 in points per possession. Part of their struggles is their poor three-point shooting, which they've obviously improved since the addition of Luke Kennard at the trade deadline. They rank 23rd at three-point shooting, but it's improved slightly, but it's not good enough still. And obviously, when you lack that and you can't get out and run, I think that takes away a lot from their offense. And again, like I said, defense and half-court offense becomes so crucial in the playoffs. So if they can't execute that obviously is going to impact them quite a bit. And I think their front court depth is really one area that they're really missing. The presence of Steven Adams, obviously, and Brandon Clark out with that Achilles, I think that just really kills their depth, especially in that center and power forward position. So I think those are their 2 glaring weaknesses. And their strengths, obviously, they got a defense anchored by Triple J, 2nd in defensive rating during the season. They got the superstar in Ja Morant. Obviously, there's some question marks now regarding his availability in this series with his hand, with that scary landing that he took, obviously, when AD tried to take the charge. But they do have some solid bench depth. Obviously, Tyus Jones, a really solid backup point guard. Luke Kennard, who can obviously shoot the lights out. And they were 4th in net rating for the season. So there are some promising signs there. But I think with all being said, and the Lakers coming good at the right time of the year, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and obviously if you have guys like Rui putting in performances like that, and by the way, I do miss him dearly. I don't know why the Wizards gave him up. Biggest mistake, another fuck up on the Wizards front office behalf. But what can you do now? He's flourishing, and I'm glad to see it in some aspect. But yeah, with all that being said, I think the Lakers are coming good at the right time of the year. They are just gelling so well now, and I think all the pieces that have been added, they're all the right kind of pieces. There's no one trying to overtake the scoring load or taking away, from one other player. They let one guy flourish one night, another guy flourish another night. There's no egos now. I sort of think they've all accepted their role, and I think the Lakers are going to be too strong in this instance, and I see them winning in 6 as well. But 3 things to watch. Obviously, the Brooks versus James matchup. I'm looking forward to seeing them go at it for the rest of the series. I know that there's going to be drama there, and we're not going to see the end of that. The depth, obviously, with the improved depth that the Lakers have compared to the lack of depth that the Grizzlies have. And the X factor for me, for the Lakers, another thing to watch is Anthony Davis. If he can stay healthy, if he can continue to, cause damage on both sides of the ball and stay injury-free this series, I think that's going to go not only a long way for the Lakers winning this series, but the Lakers going deep into the playoffs, because I think he's their most important player, and that's why I see them winning in 6 games, and that's also why I see them going possibly deep into the playoff series as well here. Obviously made those predictions. We'll recap it after we go through the East, and then we'll start to get a move on with all the rest of the predictions, but we'll start this Eastern Conference series now with the Bucks versus the Heat.
Yeah.
So obviously they've had 4 matchups this season. The Heat took out 2 of them, and the Bucks took out the other 2. So it's 2 apiece in this season series. And obviously we know the caliber that the Miami Heat were able to bring come playoff time. Obviously they've struggled this year, barely scraping through to the playoffs with that 8th seed. But what do you see, I guess, as the keys to the Heat possibly taking this series out, Marcus?
Okay, so to be honest, I'll make a case for the Heat, but I don't know if the Heat winning straight up. But obviously Giannis had that scary fall today, and he missed most of the game 1. So obviously Giannis going down, that's a huge out. I think Kyle Lowry, if he brings what he did in that playing game, if he can consistently hit some threes for them, as the same with Max Strus, I think those 2, they can really help out, because you don't really know what you're going to get with Bam, and he's my weakness. So I think Bam Adebayo not being aggressive every single night, I think they'll let them down a bit. I think he's a great player, don't get me wrong, but if Bam Adebayo's not being aggressive and not just going for that 20 to 25, We've heard Bam speak before about how he wants to be a guy who averages 20 to 25, but then he doesn't really do it. And even Jimmy Butler kind of advocates for him to get like 16 to 18 shots, but he's never really been able to do that. Or he just, I don't know if he refuses, but he just hasn't. So I've got Bam not being aggressive as my weakness. For their strength, I think playoff Jimmy Butler, I mean, it's a real thing. We all know when playoffs comes around, Jimmy Butler, he's incredible. So he has to be my strength for the Heat.
We're very similar, and I'm about to let you know why. But I'll just add some things, like you said. Yeah, the X factor with the Heat, obviously Max Strus. You see when he's not performing, like they tend to be a less of a potent offense, and when he can hit threes and score 25, 30 points in a game, I think it just adds a completely different perspective to their offense. They need to really get that 3-point shooting up, that scoring number. Obviously, they were dead last in scoring this season, actually averaging 109.3 points. And obviously, against a team like Milwaukee who can get it going, that's not a good sign. And obviously, you got a guy like Eric Spoelstra, who's such a good coach, and he's got championship pedigree, and he sort of knows how to throw multiple defensive coverages and schemes against different offenses, and I think they got a good strength in terms of protecting at the rim. But I think, like you said, it's going to be a series that I think the Bucks will take out. I think I've got the Bucks in 6 as well, actually, which is why I laughed. Our predictions have been pretty much spot on, which is crazy. But I guess what I'll touch on is just a few little strengths from the Bucks side of things, and not just for this series, but going forward in the playoffs. Obviously, they were 4th in defensive rating this year. They got an elite defense. Jrue Holiday, Giannis, Brook Lopez. And, obviously the trio of Drew, Chris, and Giannis, obviously depending on how Giannis bounces back from that scary fall that he had today, which I'm sure he'll be okay.
Yeah.
If they're back to full health and playing at the levels that they did when they took out that championship against the Phoenix Suns, I don't see a lot of teams getting in their way.
Yeah.
Obviously, you got Giannis, who's a strength in himself. He's having an incredible season, and having him alone in that team just showed today when he was out how different that team looks without him. And I think he's so important to them on both sides of the ball. But you think about this as well. This is a crazy fact, Marcus. The Bucks had the best record in the league this season, even though Holiday, Middleton, and Antetokounmpo played a total of just 236 minutes together. That made them the 35th most used trio on the team and the 1,113th most used trio in the NBA. All three were available for just 25 games, one against the Heat, and Middleton was in the starting lineup for only 12 of 25. So if those guys can get it going, get everything together, I think they're going to be hard to stop. But obviously the only thing I'd say about the Bucks is their half-court offense. They have some poor efficiency on that side of the ball. They're only averaging 1 point per possession in the half court. Again, numbers are skewed because of Chris Middleton, but the X factor for me in this sense, I believe for the Bucks, is Bobby Portis.
I have the same.
He's sneaky good as the top six man. Brings hustle, 9.6 rebounds in just 26 minutes per game. Streaky 3-point shooting, even though it's 37%, which I wouldn't really call streaky, but he doesn't mind the obviously the dirty work, getting down and dirty against guarding Jimmy Butler, fighting Bam for boards. He complements Giannis perfectly. I think he's the perfect piece, and we saw that in that championship run. So I think if he can perform at a high level, then I see the Bucks going a long way. Moving on to one of the most exciting series in this playoff first round, and that is the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the New York Knicks. And a lot of it's centered around, obviously, the summer in the off season when the whole talk about Donovan Mitchell going to New York. Obviously, they offered a bag. Sorry, the Knicks offered a plethora of picks and pieces to the Jazz. The Jazz didn't decline it because they wanted X amount of picks, or they wanted another player added into the mix. They decided to turn away from that. The Cavs obviously ended up biting on it and ended up getting Mitchell. He responded with the best of his 5 NBA seasons, averaging a career high 28.3 points, and he made every other Cavs player a little better with his presence. In the 4 matchups this year, the Cavs have taken home only one of the matchups. So the other 3 games, the Knicks have actually got the better of them. So they have a 3-1 record this year. So I'll get you to touch on the Knicks here and what you think they've done well in Game 1, and I guess what their strengths, weaknesses, X factor will be for the remainder of the series and possibly into the playoffs.
Yeah, scrap what I said about the Clippers versus Suns, because I think this will be the best first round series. Just such an eventful matchup, obviously with the Donovan Mitchell addition, like you said. The Knicks could have had him, but they kind of went with keeping their guys. I think it makes for a really interesting series. I like the construction of the Cavs team a little bit more. I think they have a little bit more talent, and I think Donovan being that guy, specifically in the playoffs, we know what he can do there. I think on a Knicks perspective, they got Bronson, they got Randall, obviously Quickly, Hart, Obi. They have a scary team come playoff time too. On the Knicks perspective, I think their X factor, Josh Hart, I think he can contain, not lock him up, but he can contain Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland, which doing the little things like rebounding offensively and guarding up on the perimeter. I think Josh Hart can really bring that aspect to this series, and obviously his ability to hit the 3 ball, he can only help. So he's my X factor. I think if he steps up big, it can do wonders for the Knicks and potentially could win them the series. I think this is a lot closer than people think. Strength I really like how the Knicks each play on that team, Tibbs kind of has an assigned role for them. Now, obviously, it hasn't gone the greatest with certain players, like Mitchell Robertson's kind of complained a bit. You have guys like Obi Toppin wanting more playing time, which is more than fair enough. But look, they're in good stead. They're in the playoffs as a pretty high seed as well. So it helps the team, but it also derails whether they'll be there or not. But I do like that aspect of the Knicks. They have a lot of scorers, but at the same time, they're not taking away from the other guys. Like Brunson, he scores the ball, but he does it at a high level, so a very efficient level. So he deserves to have the ball in his hands a lot. So I do like that about the Knicks. They're kind of reliable when it comes to putting the ball in the hoop. But for my weaknesses, I think they obviously have a pretty similar roster to when they last made the playoffs, and I don't know how big of a difference is it really when they verse the Atlanta Hawks in that series. I don't know. So that's my weakness for the Knicks. Can they jump over the hump? That's kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And another thing I think with the Knicks as well, they don't get easy buckets. I think that's one of their issues. They're dependent a lot on isolation basketball. And I guess, yes, playoff basketball is very much in the half court, but I think you need more ball movement rather than just one guy dribbling and trying to create something, you know what I mean? But in terms of the strengths, you're spot on. I think they're offensively, they're very strong. They've got guys that know what role they're playing. They've got each guy on that bench that comes off, like whether it be Obi, IQ, Quentin Grimes. I know he's been starting more, but even just like those kind of guys that can come off the bench and put points on the board. And I think they've got that kind of X factor there that shows obviously they were 4th in offensive rating and they were 11th in total points per game this year. So they definitely know how to do that on that side of the ball. But I guess my X factor for the Knicks, just to quickly add, would be Julius Randle. I think you see when you get the best of Julius Randle, he can be unstoppable, honestly, unguardable. But again, you get those games too often, especially come playoff time. He shoots 6 to 20. You saw in that Atlanta series a couple of years ago, obviously he struggled mightily against them, and obviously struggled when the playoff basketball sort of changes the style of game. So if he can improve, they won that game and he struggled mightily. So if he can just continue to be consistent and just be more efficient, I think that'll go a long way for them to obviously take out this series. But going from a Cavs perspective, obviously they are the number 1 defensive team in the NBA. They only allowed 109.9 points per 100 possessions, especially on the interior with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. Obviously, Evan Mobley, one of the favourites to win Defensive Player of the Year. I guess the weakness for them, they have a lack of playoff experience. Besides guys like Robin Lopez, Danny Green, obviously he's played a stack of playoff games. Donovan Mitchell's had a few, but a lot of these guys are inexperienced, so that might, I guess, affect them. And I guess another one of their weaknesses would be some of their role players with their shooting from the outside. Obviously, guys like Okoro have come on strong since the All-Star break. He's gone from shooting 34.1% pre-All-Star game to 42.9%, but the only factor in that situation is it's only on 2.3 attempts per game. Chetty Osman's the same. He's connecting on 43.6% since the All-Star break on 4.1 attempts. But then there's a significant drop-off. You got guys like Lamar Stevens, who shot at 34.4% clip this season, and Dean Wade fell all the way to 26.5%. So I think you got to get more out of those role-playing guys to shoot the ball a lot better from the outside. But obviously, when you have a guy like Donovan Mitchell playing the way he is, and obviously with the confidence that he's got at the moment, I think that can go a long way for the Cavs winning this series. I think some key matchups, obviously, or key talking points to take away from this series would be the Mitchell and Brunson matchup. Obviously, we know what Jalen Brunson can do in the playoffs. He showed it last year in that Jazz series when Luka was out. And Donovan Mitchell, again, the bubble, and in other series that he's obviously been a part of, he's elevated his game. The second talking point is the Cavs D versus the Knicks offense. Obviously, Cavs best defense, Knicks one of the best offenses in the league. Who blinks first, basically, will be the sort of the talking point there. And where's Danny Green? I think another thing we could really use his 3-point range, or the Cavs could really use his 3-point range, I should say. And he's only played 71 minutes in 7 appearances, 14 DNPs. I know they might involve him at some point, but I think he'd play a big role, especially with his playoff experience. But obviously, it'll depend on the rotation, the matchups, all that sort of stuff. But with all that being said, I do have the Knicks in 7 in this particular series.
It was such a tough one, but I just think the Cavs, they've had a top four defense in the NBA this season and a top 8 offense in the NBA. And I don't think that kind of goes unnoticed for an entire season, if it's regular season or not. I think that's pretty impressive, being in the top 10 for both aspects of the game. Obviously, it's more than impressive. And then they got a guy like Donovan, who's a reliable guy to go get a bucket any given time. I don't really want to harp on their team because obviously they got a great young squad over there. I think if they get eliminated, I feel like it's obviously not the end of them.
So what are we going to go with in this situation then?
Look, it's a flip of the coin. It really is. It really is.
It's another toss of the coin, man.
Ooh, you know what? You gave me the Warriors one.
All right, let's do it. I just think 3-1 in the season matchup. Now 4-1 this season. The Knicks against the Cavs. Obviously, I think they've had their measure this year, and yes, I know that they've got those key cogs like Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, and you got Garland and the like in this Cavs side. But I think the numbers speak for themselves. They've 4 out of the 5 matchups this year. They've got the Cavs measure, and I don't think they want to let a situation like this slip again, like they did with the Hawks. Obviously, they took advantage at home last time, and then they just crumbled after that against the Hawks in that first round series. So I think they wouldn't want to let this happen again. I think it's about time they moved on to the second round.
I think Tibbs, he's a great coach in his own right. So come playoff time, I think they'll be prepared. And I think we're on the money. I think the Knicks can cause some damage. You know what? I genuinely think the Knicks are going to knock out the Cavs. Like, I can see it now.
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be one kind of upset in this playoff series or in these playoffs in general. So
it's only right too. Yeah, that it's the Cavs because they are that young, rising.
We've got the Sixers and Nets. So this is an anticipated playoff series, obviously, since James Harden forced his way out of the Nets. Obviously, with all the changes the Nets have made, and this was both teams were included in this trade, obviously, with Ben Simmons and Harden. So it's a hotly contested contest. There'll be a lot of, obviously, storylines out of this, but what do you make of the Brooklyn Nets' chances? I obviously think this is going to be a majority one-sided playoff series, especially for the Sixers, and especially with this co-superstars and Joel Embiid and James Harden doing what they did this year. And I know they've had some playoff failures in the past, but I think the way they're playing this year, it's going to be tough to stop them, especially from a Nets perspective. But what can you see the Nets possibly doing to cause some troubles for the Philadelphia 76ers?
Look, you asked for troubles. I mean, what troubles can they really bring? I don't think this needs an explanation. Philly, too much firepower here. But hopefully Mikal Bridges, I'm curious to see how he performs come this playoff team as that number one option. But to be honest, I don't think that the Nets are going to be able to steal a game. But I'll just run you through my X Factor's strengths and weaknesses. So for the X Factor, Spencer Dinwiddie, Mr. Next upcoming Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton type of guy over there. For the strengths for the Brooklyn Nets, I think they come in with nothing to lose here. So I think that's a strength. Look, they're a young team now. Mikal Bridges, a young upcoming star in the making. They don't really have too much to lose. Nobody expects the Brooklyn Nets to upset the Philadelphia 76ers. So I think that's definitely a strength for them. They can look at this as a coming of age type of learning experience. I think future playoff appearances, I do expect Mikal Bridges to, lead him to the playoffs in the near future with Cam Johnson. So he can take this for years to come, seasons to come.
100%. I think there's one big fact that I've found from the Nets in terms of a strength is also their 3-point shooting since the trade deadline. They averaged 43.7%, the fifth highest after the trade deadline. And this is another interesting thing. When they make 15 or more threes in a game after the deadline, they went 9-1. When they didn't, they went 4-14. So I think that's going to be a key. If they can make their threes and stretch out that Philly defense, they can maybe sneak a game or two. But if they're inconsistent with that, obviously that's going to be a big issue for them. And they're 26th in rebound percentage, 24th in rebounds per game since the trade deadline. Obviously, there's a big drop-off from Nick Claxton as your number one rebounder to the second best, which is Royce O'Neal at 5.5. So they just don't do enough of that. They got a bottom 10 bench after the trade. But obviously a guy like Mikal Bridges, when you have him playing the way he is, and since the deadline he's been at an all-NBA level, I think he can keep you in games. But again, I just don't think they have enough firepower, like you said, to really cause any troubles for the Philadelphia 76ers, whose biggest strength, as mentioned, they got their co-superstars. James Harden led the league in assists. Joel Embiid is probably going to win his first MVP. First guy, or one of the first guys since Wilt, Bob McAdoo, Elgin Baylor, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar averaged 30 and 10 in a season, or 33 and 10 in a season. They're one of three teams that are ranked in the top 10 on both ends of the floor. They're one of the best players in the league, coming off the best year of his career, as mentioned. And they've also got the league's number one three-point shooting team around him. Their weaknesses, though, then this is where the big issue is. So their backup center depth. This year, obviously, the Sixers will depend on either Reed or PJ Tucker to fill those backup center minutes. And that's not comforting, obviously, when you've got a negative net rating when Reed is on the floor, minus 3.8, and when Tucker's on the floor, minus 6 when they're playing at center. So those 8 minutes a game that Embiid might sit in the playoffs could keep the Sixers from finally advancing out of the second round. And the X factor I have for the Sixers, despite the fact that obviously you got those co-superstars, to me it's Tyrese Maxey. If he can really play the role that, obviously we discussed it a few days ago about whether he deserves the max. I guess this is his time to sort of prove that he is that max player, and obviously be that third piece at the moment in this team that can really spark them. And not only in this series, obviously, because he might not require it as much, but obviously in the series going forward, I think a guy like Tyrese Maxey to perform to those levels and to really have those breakout games, I think will go a long way to the Sixers having a deep run in the playoffs. Three things to watch, obviously, in this series will be how the Nets guard Embiid. Can the Nets find a weakness in this Sixers offense, which would be tough to find, or even on their defensive side? And the biggest issue for the Sixers, as mentioned, is the Embiid off the floor situation. So if they can rectify that and they find a way to work out how to sort out Joel Embiid's situation when he's off the floor, then that'll go a long way to them going deep in the playoffs, as mentioned. So I have the Sixers winning in 4 games here, so I don't see the Nets being able to do anything on that side of the ball, in this particular series. And yeah, I think this is a comfortable win for the Sixers. And then the final series of the first round matchups, and the last one obviously in the Eastern Conference, is the Hawks and the Celtics. Celtics the 2nd seed, the Hawks the 7th seed. The last time these two teams met in the playoffs, which was the 2016 first round, Al Horford, currently on the Celtics, was on the Hawks, while Marcus Smart was the only Celtics player who remains from that series. But regardless of that, no matter who the opponent is, the Celtics would be the heavy favorite in this series. So they're the defending Eastern Conference champs. Statistically, they've been the best team in the league this season. I guess in the 3 matchups, you obviously seen the Celtics have taken out all 3 contests. It's pretty one-sided in my opinion here. I'll let you touch on the Hawks and I guess some key aspects of their game and some weaknesses that obviously will impact their ability to go deep in this series.
So Trae Young and the Hawks, they don't seem to be on the best of pages right now. I just made up a word, but they don't seem to be on the best page as of now. John Collins, to me, look, it's been a while. He shouldn't really be in that Atlanta uniform. I really do think another team should have snagged him, or they just should have traded him. I don't even think he would really want to be there at the moment, but he can't really seem to find a valuable role at the Hawks. Sadiq Bey was playing really solid for them. Game 1, he kind of struggled. He didn't really play all too well. but it feels like morale's just down in Atlanta, and Boston are obviously in the hunt for redemption to win that NBA title. So I don't really know how to feel about the Hawks going forward. I think, yeah, it's kind of hard to run the offense through a guy like Trey, who's very ball dominant, who wants to play on the ball, not really come off screens and that sort of thing. Even though he could be really efficient doing so, he's just so good playing in the pick and roll and having it in his hands. But also DeJounte needs it, so it's a really weird dynamic over there in Atlanta. But for the X factor for the Hawks, they just have to have that next man up attitude if they want to cause some damage this playoffs. Even if they sneak in a couple of games, I'll be impressed. A guy like Sadiq Bey or Bogdanovic could, they could step up if Trey's not shooting well or DeJounte's not, and they could definitely steal a game, but yeah, I don't know if they will. And then for my strengths, it's Trae Young, because even at his worst, he's still Trae Young. Like, he can still give you 25, 8, and have a dominant performance, but he'll shoot 7 for 18, but they'll win the game. We've seen that before in that playing game. So he's a strength, I think. Everything's kind of ran around Trey. Even if they don't really want it to be, I think he's their motor. You give it to him, you let him make plays, and you see what happens. And then for my weaknesses, I have just two ball dominant, DeJounte and Trey. They don't complement each other, obviously, so I had to put that as my weakness.
Yeah, you make some good points. I think key areas for them in this series, I think if they can get those two center tandem of Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu going, they're obviously top 10 in second chance points. They beat the Heat in that play-in because of that 26-6 advantage from offensive rebounds. They're the number one team in the NBA in 2-point field goals. They don't take an awful lot of threes. And they're 7th in the NBA in points in the paint. So if they can obviously get deep in the paint against this Celtics defense, that might give them a chance. Physicality inside again with those guys, I think that's a big strength of theirs. But Atlanta's 21st in the NBA in 3-point percentage and 28th in attempts, which is surprising considering obviously you got a guy like Trae Young whose big weapon is his 3-point shooting. But yeah, despite the prowess of Trae Young and all of that sort of stuff, it's the defense, which they have a big weakness in, bottom 10 in points allowed and opponent field goal percentage. I think a guy like DeAndre Hunter, if he can come along and be an X factor, I think that'll take him a long way into, I guess, stepping into that, or being competitive in this role, I should say. Or sorry, I got distracted. So, because the audio was cutting out, so I thought it might have stopped again. So it was throwing me off. And your speaker's very staticky. I don't know what it is. When you speak, it's like. So let me start again. Sorry. And so the X factor, DeAndre Hunter, I think if you can get things going on both ends of the floor, being able to put the effective performance on the offensive side and be able to guard guys like Tatum and Brown effectively, I think that could help him. It'll take pressure off the main guys. It'll open up the offense to Trey, DJ, etc. 3 things to watch. I think you'll see the Celtics targeting Trae Young a lot in those pick and rolls. In the switch side of things, when Jason Tatum has the ball, they'll try and get Trey to defend Tatum, get him in those scenarios as much as possible. Atlanta's second chance points, I think that might trouble the Celtics to some extent. And then Al Horford's 3-point shooting over his previous 4 seasons, he shot 35.1%. This season, he's shooting 44.6%, best among 103 players with at least 300 attempts in the NBA. So the Celtics want to shoot a lot of threes, and I think although that's a big strength of theirs, they do make a lot. They live and die by the 3, which is their weakness. So Boston averages the second most 3-point attempts in the league, and in their wins, they're connecting on 40.3% of their deep balls. In losses, they're shooting 31.6%. So averaging so many more threes than twos makes the team easy to defend. So if they hit multiple cold streaks from deep, that could spell doom for their hopes of getting to the finals. Obviously, it might not affect them much in this particular series, but in a series against a really elite defense or a team that can obviously locked down, that might hurt them. And their strengths, they got good bench depth, obviously Muscala, Robert Williams, Brogdon, Hauser, Pritchard, Blake Griffin, Cornet, Grant Williams. Again, you might not see a lot of these guys in the rotations from Joe Mazzulla, but again, you know that you can rely on some of these guys to at least come in and have an impact. And you obviously got the star power with the two-headed monster of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Tatum averaging 30.1 points, Jaylen Brown averaging 26.6. Second best defensive rating in the regular season, third in defensive rebounds. And they ranked second in both offensive and defensive efficiency in the regular season and became just the third team in 27 seasons to have a top 3 ranking on both ends of the floor. The other two were the 2014-15 Warriors and the 2016-2017 Warriors, which both won the NBA championship at those years. So again, it's a promising sign for them in terms of their strengths. And I think their big X factor, despite the fact that he only played in 35 games this season, is Robert Williams. We know what he can do, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're at their best. They were especially strong. They had a plus 15.9 points per 100 possessions when he played alongside Horford on the front line. This matchup obviously might favour a little bit more of having 5 shooters with Horford at the 5, but they really need Williams with that X factor, that intensity, both on the defensive side of the ball and obviously his rim running ability. I think that will help him go a long way in the playoffs if he can be healthy and cause some problems for opposing teams. So that's basically, I guess, the key takeaways. And I have the Celtics winning in 4, sweeping. I think they don't have any weak spots either offensively or defensively in their rotation. They execute well on both ends of the floor. Tatum's a star. Was terrific, absolutely terrific through the first 3 rounds of the playoffs last year. So I think this one's going to be a clean sweep.
I can see them pulling a game, but obviously I don't see them causing any damage against Boston. But that wraps up our first round of the West and East.